Hi, this is Eliyahu Berkowitz with Breaking Israel News. Also, here's my editor, David Sidman. He's from Efrat. He's recording in Efrat, and I'm in the Golan. But through the wonders of technology, we are able to bring this to you together. The hot news today, of course, is Turkey and how Donald Trump is pulling out the U.S. troops from Turkey, which is endangering the Kurdish fighters, the Kurdish groups that were the allies of America in the fight against ISIS. And one of the reasons why we're doing this video is Trump is getting an awful lot of flack, an awful lot of pushback about his decision to pull out. So first, to fill you in on what the news aspect is, the U.S. has approximately 1,000 troops in northeast Syria, and Turkey wants to go into Syria with a military force to establish a 20-mile buffer zone. The border is 500 miles long, and one of the reasons they want to do that is they want to resettle. They have the most Syrian refugees of any country in the world. They have 3.6 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. They'd like to establish a buffer zone to resettle up to 2 million of these refugees. They also want to establish a buffer zone to set some distance between them and the Kurdish groups in Syria. The U.S. has been running patrols, joint patrols with Turkey in order to establish this buffer zone, but the U.S. wants to limit the zone to only 9 miles. So there is a difference of opinion between the U.S. and NATO. One of the things that's making the situation so complicated.
How long does Turkey want it to be?
Turkey wants it to go 20 miles in, and America wants to go 9 miles in. So
there's a 10-mile discrepancy.
There's a 10-mile discrepancy. To be perfectly candid, a lot of people have said that perhaps Turkey's intent is to instigate hostilities in order to generate an excuse to go in with full force and perhaps make a land grab in Syria, which, considering that right now Syria is very weak and they've been suffering from a civil war for several years now, it's a vacuum, and it would be an easy situation, a ready situation for them to go in and make that land grab. The situation is complicated by the fact that Turkey is a U.S. ally via NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Yeah.
So if I could just jump in here.
Sure.
If Erdogan's intention was really to empower the Syrian people and resettle them in their land as free citizens of Syria, what he should have done was to empower the Kurdish forces. He should have armed and trained the Western allied Kurdish forces. Because what that could have done is that could have toppled the Assad's regime and paved the way for a new Syria, where any Syrian refugee would feel free to go back to their country as it becomes a more Western-leaning country. Of course, Erdogan did not do that. Erdogan kept these refugees inside Turkey. Some of them he allowed passage towards Europe. And he's using them as an excuse to exactly what you said, land grab in Syria. Because those who follow Erdogan and those who understand his modus operandi know that Syria is just the final stop before Jerusalem. Erdogan wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, which of course included all of Israel. And we know this because he has all these groups and he invests all this money and infrastructure inside Israel itself, most people don't realize that Erdogan and his regime in Turkey has an entire network of educators, of cultural centers, of influencers who go into the Arab sections of East Jerusalem and rally them behind Turkey, try to convert them into Turkish patriots, get them to understand the history of the Ottoman Empire and how great it was and how it was the most successful caliphate. And it's all, and by the way, he's already butting heads with Jordan over sovereignty over the Temple Mount. So it's not 100% against Israel. And this is all going on. And why is he doing it? Well, the reason he's doing it is because his long-term plan is to conquer Israel, which is why he's so obsessed with it. He invites the terrorist little girl, Ahmed Tamimi, or whatever the heck her name is, to Turkey to dine with him. And he's doing all this because he wants his stake. He wants this to lay his stake, and he wants to lay his claim now in Jerusalem. So it'll be a much smoother conquest when he meets us on the border of the Golan.
I think
where you live.
I think what you're pointing out is you jumped right into it. You jumped right into the soup right away. You're absolutely right. People don't understand Turkey. Turkey has the second largest military in NATO right after the US. They're huge. And if you don't understand Turkey, you're not going to understand this huge power.
Not so much Turkey, it's Erdogan.
Correct. When the Ottoman Empire fell, Ataturk had to make a decision, and he chose to secularize Turkey, and therefore Turkey was able, unlike the Ottoman Empire that preceded it, Turkey was able to join into the modern world. But
NATO.
Yeah, including NATO in the Second World War. They not in the Second World War. They were with the Allies in the Second World War, fighting against the Axis, as opposed to many other Muslim nations which sided with the Third Reich. And what people don't understand is there's a power struggle going on in the world of Islam. I don't know if this has always been the case, but people want to be the leader of Islam. And if you're the leader of Islam, could be a very scary person. ISIS is trying to establish a caliphate. Saudi Arabia, their U.S. ally, perhaps not the ideal ally, but they consider themselves as the host of Mecca, the head of the is it the Shia? Yeah, those Sunnis. And the Iran is trying to be the leader of the Shia, and they are dead set against Saudi Arabia. And if you throw into that, Erdogan sees himself, as you said entirely correctly, he sees himself as trying to bring back the Ottoman Empire, which for I think it was 700 years they ruled. And what's crazy is he's even met with the Pope. This is entirely about religion. And it's not so much good guy versus bad guy, white against black, because Erdogan is straddling the fence. He's buying Russian military hardware, and at the same time, he's going to be in conflict with the Russians when he goes into Syria. The Russians.
Well, he's testing. Yeah.
No, go on. Go.
He's testing the U.S. He's saying he's doing kind of what Iran. He's ripping a page out of Iran's playbook, meaning Iran will seize an oil tanker in the Gulf and say, "Let's see what the U.S. does." Oh, they don't do anything. Let's see how far I can go, and they'll keep kind of nudging and jabbing. They'll take down a drone. They'll do all these little things that stop just short of an all-out act of war, just to see how far they can push the U.S.'s buttons. And when Erdogan buys all these Russian arms against the NATO agreements, he's doing the exact same thing. He's saying, let's see how serious NATO is. Let's see. He's always testing us. And now what he did is he presented Trump with this plan to create this buffer zone in Syria, which at face value sounds innocuous, but when you actually look at what's going on, first of all, northern Syria is relatively under control. Okay, the Kurdish forces are doing an okay job. And what now Erdogan has always had a beef with the Kurds. Why has he always had a beef with the Kurds? Because they've always wanted to establish an independent state in northern Syria, southern Turkey, and and Iraq, and that would be Kurdistan. Well, Erdogan is an expansionist, so even though the Kurds are relatively peaceful people, it wouldn't work out. So what does Erdogan do? He convinces Trump to get his troops out of there and create, as you said, a 9-mile buffer zone inside of Syria. Now, what's the problem?
20 miles.
The problem, he wants to start a 20-mile. Let's say he starts a 20-mile buffer zone inside northern Syria. Sounds not so bad until now, right? Okay, he's 20 miles in. It's no man's land. Yes, it sucks for the Kurds, who are U.S. allies, who are basically getting thrown under the bus, in my opinion. But let's say he gets his 20 miles and there's the rest of Syria. Here's a question. Once those U.S. troops are out of Syria, once Western troops are out of Syria, who's going to stop Erdogan from pushing for another 10 miles and another 10 miles and another 200 miles? Where does it end? He's always going to come up with some excuse why he needs to push further and further and further. And he knows that Syria is very volatile, and it's at a very weak point. And there's nothing easier for Erdogan to do at this point than to basically conquer all of Syria. Because most people don't realize Syria is not really a country. It's basically 5 different factions and religions that have all been carved together by European colonialists. You got Shiites, Christians, Druze, Kurds, and then they're all being ruled by this tiny minority called Alawites who aren't even Muslim. So what do you think? Do you really think that a 20-mile buffer zone inside Syria is going to satiate Erdogan's appetite? I don't.
Okay, also, you brought up something which is right now a very burning issue for me. As I said, I'm not a big fan of Trump. He's getting a lot of heat for this that I think is... I'm sorry?
I thought you were a big fan of Trump.
No, but I like calling balls and strikes. If a guy does something good, you got to give him his props. But if he does something bad, you got to say he did something bad. Trump has a tendency, he's been a boss his whole life. He's been rich and obnoxious his entire life. So he has a tendency to say really smart things in the most annoying way possible. This pullout from Syria, as I said, they're NATO allies. Several months ago, he was talking about maybe we should take NATO apart, and everyone jumped all over him. NATO was established in the Cold War to stand up against the Soviet Union, which no longer exists. NATO really is no longer, and for a long time has not been relevant. And we can see this right now with Turkey, which should not be an ally, certainly not one that we have signed agreements with. So when Trump said we should reassess NATO, he was absolutely right, but he said it in a way that got everyone angry. Now he's stuck with that. He's stuck with being an ally of Turkey. You can't shoot at your allies. There's no way he can stand in the way of Turkey. At the same time, the Kurds were practical allies when America was fighting ISIS in Syria. They did all the hard work, the heavy lifting in fighting ISIS. So that puts America in a very difficult position. I also want to say that the media is doing what it usually does, which is overstating what they see as something bad. America has 1,000 troops in Syria, not a lot, especially when you compare it to the Russian military presence in Syria, which includes, a major Air Force base. And so America really doesn't have a military presence so far. And they're talking about only taking out a small percentage of that. I think it's 20 military advisors, not very many. And so far they've just evacuated 2 observation posts in northeast Syria. So to say that America's hanging the Kurds out to dry is not necessarily true. And also, I'm very, very angry at the media because what they did was they criticized Trump for saying he's pulling out of northeast Syria, but at the same time, they criticized him for threatening Turkey in hyperbole with economic sanctions. economic sanctions work against Turkey. A couple years ago, Turkey shot down a Soviet fighter that they say intruded their airspace, and Russia responded with really serious economic sanctions, and it worked. Turkey began to toe the line and stopped standing up to Russia. So Trump is actually doing the right thing. He's just saying it in a really obnoxious way. I support what he's doing, and I think he is not hanging out the Kurds to dry, but at the same time he's not going to be shooting at our allies. If anything, I really hope that what comes out of this is it's time to look at Turkey and say the Turkey of today is not the Turkey that it was a U.S. ally in World War II. Turkey did not allow the U.S. to have bases or air bases when they went into Iraq. Turkey is not an ally. And this issue of Islam and the Islamist motivations of Erdogan are very clearly a powerful factor that people are also not talking about. Erdogan is an Islamist. He wants Jerusalem, and it's not an insane thing for him to want that. Jerusalem would give him a crown that he could use to rule the Muslim world. For the Muslims, for Erdogan, America is the great Satan, and they've said so. At the same time as they're a NATO ally.
Well, yeah, so that's where I disagree with you, because if Trump realizes that NATO is so bad, why is he getting the green light to NATO's most full ally to basically take over U.S. allies with the Kurds in northern Syria? I mean, what Trump should have, if Trump should have said no, what if Trump just said, I'm keeping my troops there? I think we can get it. We're working hard with the Kurds. We can get the situation under control. We don't need you there. You stay. Turkey stays in Turkey. Let the let the Syrians. Let's try to build instead of divide and conquer, which is exactly what Erdogan is doing in Syria. And instead, he was just kind of like, okay, go ahead. And if you do anything bad, if you don't watch over the ISIS fighters, whatever that means, then I'll ruin your economy. But again, I go back to reality, which is, how is he going to know what he's doing to the ISIS fighters if he has no observers on the ground? How is he going to know? How is he going to be able to tell Erdogan when Erdogan tells him, I need to expand another 200 miles? And even if he doesn't expand another 200 miles, he doesn't even have to. All he has to do is get his Syrian refugees, train them as agents of Turkey, and say, "Oh yeah, I'm sending them back in." And
you're touching on another.
They'll be as mercenaries of Turkey, and there's no one there to stop him. And that's what I see happening, because I think we both know that a 20-mile buffer zone will not satisfy Erdogan's appetite.
That's very true, and you're also touching on another point that people are not talking about, which is the Kurds have I think it's at least 10,000 ISIS prisoners. These are the ISIS guys you see chopping off people's heads. They captured them, and they're in POW camps in Syria, being held by the Kurds. Many of these fighters, at least 2,000 of them, are actually European nationals who left Europe to go fight ISIS. These are the people who go back to Europe and do terror attacks in their own countries. And Europe is refusing to deal with this. The European countries have refused to take these people back. And what's going to happen when Erdogan goes in? The Kurds are not going to be able to keep them in the POW camps. These people are going to go free. They're going to go back to Europe or America or wherever they came from. And then you've got ISIS people running around. If you dump it all on Trump, there's no way that he can deal with it. Everyone is running away, pointing their finger at Trump, when he's actually doing the right thing. What I would have liked to have seen was to have Trump stand there, rip up the NATO agreement, and say, "Okay, Turkey, you can go in. We're gonna shoot at you." But he
doesn't even have to do that. He doesn't even have to do that. He doesn't have to open a war with Turkey. All he has to do is arm and train the Kurds enough so that when Turkey does go in, they'll be well equipped to push them back or fend them off. I mean, I know Turkey is obviously an overwhelming force for the Kurds, but it'll definitely make Erdogan think twice about his grand scheme if he knows that he's going to face some fierce resistance from well-trained, well-armed Kurdish fighters. And this is something that I believe America has been a lot of it is Obama's fault, but
it's totally
America's
totally
been
Obama's
asleep
fault.
at the wheel when it comes to training the Kurds. I think we can both agree that this is Turkey's setting a new precedent here. And I see no reason why they won't say the same thing about Iraq. And I see why they won't, decide that we need a buffer zone in Iraq, because I don't know why Iraq is any more stable than Syria. Syria, the situation in Syria has relatively calmed down compared to a country like Iraq, where Iran is, what's going on in Iraq. There's mass riots. They're killing protesters. Iran is starting to use Iraq is starting to set up bases and installations and batteries inside Iraq. And Erdogan's focused on Syria. Well, that's great. But what about Iraq? And now there's a good chance, unless Erdogan is colluding with Iran, don't be surprised if you see Erdogan start this buffer business inside Iraq as well. And,
I also want to point out,
it's going to be a game of inches.
You touched on something, on another thing. You're doing that a lot of little issues here that people aren't talking about. Obama, not so long ago, gosh, I remember there was a video. Obama was getting heat for not dealing with ISIS, and then he released a video showing U.S. Air Force bombing ISIS convoys of oil trucks. And then it turns out that video was actually the Russian Air Force bombing ISIS, because Obama was lying to everyone. He was not dealing with ISIS at all. Not only was he not dealing with ISIS, but Assad was using chemical weapons. And Obama famously set up red lines, said, oh, you can't go over this red line. If you use chemical weapons, I'll go in. And then I remember, oh my gosh, Assad used deadly mustard gas. And Obama said, well, it's not technically chemical warfare. And it wasn't. But it was such a disgusting thing for him to do. He claims that he was the man of peace, but people don't realize that wartime deaths went up 70% under Obama around the world. He allowed people to die everywhere, as long as they were the people he wanted dead. 250,000 Syrians. You want to complain about the Kurds? Well, what did Obama do for them? He set this up. When Assad used chemical weapons, Trump bombed him twice. Okay, this is the way you have to deal with these people. And it does come down to religion and politics, the things people don't like talking about. We also see
it all started with George Bush Jr., who I still don't understand till this day exactly why he invaded Iraq and destabilized Saddam Hussein. But either way, that's neither here nor there.
I also want to point out, if I may, you were the one who wrote about how Erdogan is very supportive of who? Erdogan is very supportive of Ilhan Omar, who coincidentally hates Israel and hates Trump. And she's not a very
it's no secret person. Yeah, that's interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know about the hate Trump part.
Oh,
but,
I think what it comes down to,
I didn't even make that connection.
In the world today, Israel is not, it's not that Israel is the major thing. It's just that it tells a lot about what's under the surface. Ilhan Omar, she's from Somalia. Her hatred of Israel has nothing to do with her personally. Her hatred of Israel has to do with her persona, everything about her. She hates Israel because of all the other stuff she hates. I'm sorry, you're saying?
That's interesting. Let me ask you a quick question.
Sure.
I want to ask you, you mentioned something. I want to ask you a quick question that might be a little bit off topic.
Okay.
But, okay, first of all, I want to see if we agree that what's happening, what I envision is Erdogan is going to keep pushing further and further into Syria until he hopefully gets to the border of Israel. He's going to try the same thing in Iraq. And and thus reestablish, fulfill his dream of reestablishing the Ottoman Empire. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would. And what people don't understand is that the borders in the region are only from World War II. It's so if to have these multinational
Yeah, right.
aspirations is
To a guy
totally
like
understandable. It's realistic.
to a guy to a guy like Erdogan, and actually to a lot of Muslims, the idea of an Ottoman Empire makes a lot of sense. It resonates with them because a country like
Absolutely.
Iraq, which is basically three different factions, stuffed into one, and a country like Syria, which is five different factions stuffed into one, it doesn't make sense that there's a border between Syria and Iraq. I mean, Iraq is Kurds, Shiites, and Sunnis, and then you got Syria, that's Kurds, Shiites, a few Sunnis, Christians, Druze, and the Alawites who rule it. It's very confusing, I think, to the Muslim culture that these countries are carved out to begin with, and that's another reason why I believe that it will be very easy for Erdogan, once he's in Syria, to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, because it's the lines there are so blurry. What province is what? There's what is there a river that separates this place? For example, if Israel went into southern Lebanon, they could say, okay, we're going to the Litani. The Litani is a river. Is there any clear point where America has said, okay, don't you dare go, this is our red line. If you make it to here, we'll bomb you? No. And if Erdogan could negotiate Trump into letting him in, 10 miles into Syria, why shouldn't he convince him to let him in, every year, another few hundred miles into Syria? Like, what's the big deal? It's just Syria, right? But anyways, I think what we're looking at is the realization of Erdogan's expansionist dreams happening right before our eyes. And by the way, I just want to ask you, I want to kind of transition into the biblical perspective. Before I do that, I want to ask you a question, because you're obviously more versed in this subject than I am. You mentioned Ilhan Omar from Somalia. From what I understood, the war of Gog and Magog involves Ethiopia, or is that incorrect?
Also, and that's something that
So if you look at a country like Ethiopia today, it's hard to imagine how Ethiopia could possibly be any threat to Israel or anyone to begin with. I mean, first of all, their economy is rebounding somewhat nicely compared to Africa, but maybe is it possible that Ilhan Omar is the representative from that region in the war of Gog and Magog, or is that a little far-fetched?
to be really honest, I don't know. One of the aspects of prophecy is prophets will say it and everyone will be like, no way. Yeah. And then when it suddenly appears in front of your face, then you're like, oh, that's what they meant. And then everyone's like, oh, sure, that makes sense. Yeah, there's definitely Gog and Magog, first of all, is multinational against Israel. So I wrote last week an article about how, or it was earlier in the week, about how many of the nations mentioned as part of Gog and Magog are now currently in the area we define as Turkey, and that's why you can look at Turkey and say perhaps Gog and Magog. So this is definitely a possibility that Ilhan Omar, her alliance, her strange. Why would Erdogan support a Democratic senator in a Democratic congressman? Well, that's because, in essence, perhaps, as you said, they have this Gog and Magog connection. So perhaps it is prophesied that Turkey, as the head of Gog and Magog, will connect with Ilhan Omar. It's very possible.
So can you kind of translate to the people at home what this incursion into Syria, what this expansionist incursion means in the grand picture of biblical prophecy?
Well, first of all, of course, when we're talking about a multinational conflict in the region, we're definitely fulfilling some of the elements of Gog and Magog. Also, there is an oblique reference that Rabbi Yekutiel Fish pointed out in Yonatan ben Uziel's commentary on the Torah, where he was describing the prophecy of Bilam. And Bilam said that Bilam, when he was talking about Kittim and Syria and Ever, Yonatan ben Uziel said that the Gog will come out of Constantinople. Constantinople, at the time that Yonatan ben Uziel wrote, was the capital of the Roman Empire. Constantinople now is one of the largest cities in Turkey, and it's called Istanbul. So there is a side to say that Gog and Magog will come out of Istanbul, out of Turkey, and certainly a lot of the cities, Syrians, and many of the other cities mentioned as Gog and Magog, many of the other nations are currently located in Turkey. So I think what we're seeing right now is a struggle amongst these people to see who is going to be the head of Gog and Magog, which is kind of crazy. It's like, do you want to be Satan? And all these people are saying, yes, we want to be the head of Satan. It sounds absurd to people, even people who don't like Israel. You say, well, do you want to be the head of and lead the war of Gog and Magog that will destroy the world and kill 2/3 of the people? No one in their right mind would say yes. However, we have these people actually struggling to be the head of Gog and Magog rather enthusiastically, which is very strange. So yeah, this is definitely fulfilling some of the elements of Gog and Magog. It's, like I said, it's crazy, an alliance between Ilhan Omar and Turkey. And we're seeing, I think, a struggle right now between Erdogan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, even, I think, who is going, and Ilhan Omar, who is going to head Gog and Magog.
Not only them, when we interviewed Mordechai Kedar, he was saying there's all these different Arab Muslim countries trying to claim their stake on the Temple Mount, including Turkey, of course.
Right.
Of course, Jordan, Qatar, who backs Hamas, and
let's not leave out the Pope. Let's not leave out the Pope. The Pope, the Pope looked right at Abbas. He gave both Abbas and Erdogan medals with a dragon on it, straddling the globe. This was what was it on the medal. And he called both Abbas and Erdogan angels of peace. Now, I can understand, trying to make nice, trying to make peace, but to look at those men and call them the angel of peace is a real disturbing spiritual interpretation. I think there's a deep spiritual problem there for him to call these men the angels of peace. I don't know what his definition of peace is, but if a definition of peace involves a dragon in the world, yeah.
Well, I mean, the whole Catholic Church is a very corrupt organization, and you're talking about people who covered for pedophiles. There's something going on there that's very sinister.
Well, I'll tell you where it started. The Vatican began as a replacement of Jerusalem. Now, that's just saying we don't need God's plan. We are rewriting the plan. God made a covenant. We're rewriting it. The Vatican, the reason why they're celibate is because the high priest had to be separate from his wife before Yom Kippur. So they took that and threw it over the entire year and said, we're entirely celibate. Their dress in the Vatican, the rituals, the incense, the structure itself are all based on the temple. They wanted to replace Jerusalem. So they have a vested interest
Right, and
in making sure the temple does not return.
I just published a story about how a Waqf leader met with with Vatican officials, and he basically spoke about the Muslim connection to the Temple Mount and how it has to be protected just like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the Vatican officials just stood quietly, straight-faced, and let him completely cut the ties of Judaism and Jewish people to the land of Israel, and more specifically Jerusalem. So that they're also,
it probably took a huge effort on their part. It took a huge effort on their part not to cheer out loud. The Vatican cannot coexist with Israel. The Vatican cannot coexist with Jews in Jerusalem. The Vatican cannot coexist with the temple. It cannot. Islam has a problem with it. Vatican doesn't have a problem. So
they have their treasures from the temple.
Also, they cannot give us the treasures. They cannot coexist with us. If we're in the world, they cannot be. And quite simply, anyone who objects to Jews in Jerusalem is in the same camp.
Right, and you have to ask yourself, why are they hiding the treasures from the temple? Why don't, usually when one nation conquers another, they put them on display in a museum. Not even give them back. At least put them on display. Why don't they display the treasures from our temple? Because they know.
Right, and
they know
about Erdogan. Erdogan is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had Jerusalem for 700 years, and there was a big fight between the Catholic Church and the Ottomans and the Muslims over Jerusalem. They don't want a temple in Jerusalem, so therefore they have to own Jerusalem to make sure the temple doesn't happen. Because if the temple happens,
that's why they're making strange bedfellows with some of the cruelest Muslim leaders around.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's actually a good place to end it right before
I was
Yom
thinking
Kippur.
the same thing.
We have to hydrate because the Jewish people in Israel and throughout the world are actually fasting on Yom Kippur. So it's very important to drink a lot of water today for us. And if you're fasting, you as well, drink a lot of water. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as we enjoyed making it. And please share it, because most people are asleep at the wheel. Not because they're ignorant or stupid, just because they have other things to worry about, which is understandable. We don't. So share this video with anyone who you think needs to understand exactly what's going on in the world, how dangerous it is, and how it's all connected to biblical prophecy. I'm David Sidman, editor with Breaking News. This is the world's top biblical journalist, Eliyahu Berkowitz, signing off, and have an easy fast.
Amen.